8, 7, 6, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Show. I'm your host, Ben Gothard, and today we have the honor of speaking with the Honorable Michael Warren, a judge for the 6th Circuit Court in Oakland County, Michigan. How you doing today, Judge?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am fantastic, and I am so grateful that you would carve out the time to speak with me today. So thank you very much for being on the show.
You're very welcome.
All righty. So I want to know, what is your story?
Wow, that's interesting. So I am a child of Detroit. I was born, very interesting. It does have a big part of my life. My father was a very poor person, came from a Jewish family, although his mother, who is a Jew, married a Protestant, and they were basically ostracized by her family for about 5 years until my father's brother, who's the older of the two children, was conceived, and when they knew that she was pregnant, they started talking to her again. He then became a very adamant atheist and has kind of changed his position a little bit. Is more of he believes in kind of the force and things like that. I'll tell you why that's important as we go down the road. My mother, it comes from a very traditional Catholic family from the suburbs of Detroit, and they fell in love as high school sweethearts. And my mom worked her way through school and became a registered nurse. And my father basically ended up, after a few jobs, working for the state of Michigan, basically as a bureaucrat. So pretty humble beginnings. I remember my mom going to school when I was a little kid, trying really hard to get that. Just back then, it was an associate's degree. And then her first job was like a midnight nursing job. And I was raised in the city of, well, actually, for part of it, we lived in St. Clair Shores with my grandparents, and we lived like in the attic. And we did that for about a year, and then moved out to the city, and then eventually to the suburbs. And one of the things that my parents really instilled in me was a sense of commitment to education and trying to be the best person possible and giving back to the community. That's played a big role. So I went through the Detroit public schools to about 6th grade, then went to St. Clair Shores, which is a suburban district. Went to Wayne State University. I went to high school in St. Clair Shores, Lakeview High School, and then went to Wayne State University, which is in the heart of Detroit, another public university. And then went to U of M, go blue, in Ann Arbor, and graduated. While I was at Wayne State, I worked as a busboy. I ended up becoming the head busboy, but that's what I did. I worked for a catering company. When I go to restaurants or a banquet, I know how to do everything. It's kind of still part of my persona. And but had this burning desire to be in public service, and I thought that being a lawyer would be the way there. Now, my initial thought was I was going to be a lawyer and become a prosecutor, and I've never become a prosecutor. Instead, I graduated from law school, went to go work for the Michigan Supreme Court, and I did that for 2 years. I worked for Justice Dorothy Comstock Riley, and it was a fabulous job and position. Went to work for a major law firm in Detroit called Honigman Miller. Did that for about 6 months, got pulled out of there to go work for the State Board of Education as their in-house policy lawyer and policy reform guy. And I did that for a couple of years. The window of reform closed, unfortunately, quickly. And so I decided I didn't want to be a bureaucrat in Lansing. I wanted to go back into private practice. I went back to my old law firm, did mergers and acquisitions for a while, and then left there, even though I became a partner, to go work for Cornerstone Schools. And Cornerstone Schools at the time was a set of schools that were faith-based, Christ-centered schools that were serving the kids of Detroit who didn't have a lot of options. And we had although we were tuition based, you basically had a sliding tuition, and if you were poor, you didn't pay anything or very little. If you were better off, you'd pay more. But we subsidized all the education for all the kids. And it's from there that I became a judge. So I have this really eclectic background. When I was at Honigman, I got appointed to work for the State Board of Education. I've been a member, and then I got appointed. And so I had this really weird career track. While all that was going on, I met my wife on the debate team at Wayne State, love of my life. We've been married for about 30 years, and it's been fabulous. We have a couple of children, a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old, and have lived in kind of the same kind of suburban Detroit community for a very long time. When I became a judge, I was, so I have a felony docket, which has kind of the, something as mundane as credit card fraud to something as serious as armed robbery, rape, and murder. I have all those kinds of cases. And I also have civil cases involving $25,000 or more. So very, very serious, important cases. And I was focused on that, but I also was still very concerned about public service, not just in the judiciary, but in education, as I had, my experience had been. So I wrote a book called America's Survival Guide, and you can still get that. It's still in print, americasurvivalguide.com. And that's about how our country has forgotten our founding first principles, our history, and why that's a grave threat to our survival as a free people. About 10 years ago, my then 10-year-old daughter pounded on the table and demanded a new celebration for America. And that's how Patriot Week got started. And to give you a little bit of background on that, I'm sorry I'm rambling, but you asked, so this is what you get.
Rambling's encouraged.
All right. So I chose the background of my parents. Now, why is that important? Because I was raised by the atheistic father, the disaffected Catholic mother, as a nothing. My dad would always say, Mike, you can believe anything you want, just remember it's all, and he would, BS would be with the word that he'd use. And so I was a very adamant, vocal, I know it's hard to believe, vocal atheist. And then as a little kid, all the way up until kind of high school. And in high school, I said, maybe there's God, maybe there's not, maybe the Greeks, pantheon, maybe the Buddhist, I don't know. So I became an agnostic. I was a very adamant agnostic, very vocal. There's even less of those than atheists, up until law school. And then my third year in law school, I proposed to my wife. I was kind of thinking about my life. I came across a Bible, got inspired. I give all the credit to the Holy Spirit, came down, and overnight I decided, okay, I'm a Catholic, much to the shock of my family and friends. I called my grandmother up from Ann Arbor, called her. She was also living in St. Clair Shores at the time. I said, Grandma, you're going to bring me to church this weekend? And she went, Michael? I said, yeah. She goes, is this a joke? I said, no, really. You're going to bring me to church this weekend. So I go to church and eventually take what's called Religious Education Formation classes, RCIA. And my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, fought in the Battle of the Bulge. I really admired him. He was my sponsor. And then I went through that, and now I've been a practicing Catholic. So why is that important? Well, I realized as an adult convert, we had this thing called a liturgical calendar, a religious calendar. We have all these holidays that we celebrate. We have Ash Wednesday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter, Pentecost, Advent. I don't really think even the Pope tries to defend that our Savior was born on December 25th, but we know that it's important to stop on the hustle bustle of our day and to renew our faith. And all the great religions have this. Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhist, Taoist, they all have this idea of Islam, they all have this idea of a liturgical calendar, to stop in the hustle bustle of your day and renew your faith. And it struck me, based on my background, because I was a history major at Wayne State and focused on constitutional law at U of M, that America used to have a civic calendar. we used to celebrate Washington's birthday, Lincoln's birthday, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Thanksgiving, Armistice Day, for the same reason, to stop on the hustle bus of our day and renew our faith in America. And in fact, when we declared independence, John Adams, who's really the leading patriot of the revolution, he wrote to his wife, Abigail, that the anniversary of that day would be forever remembered and celebrated with bonfires and illuminations in the sky, and speeches and games. And he said it should be a great festival and should be forever celebrated. And he was right. We still have the 4th of July, right? Independence Day. Just went through that. But he also said it should be a solemn day of devotion for the blessings of liberty. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time I had a hot dog or July 4th party was not a particularly solemn occasion, right? We have really hollowed out and gutted our holidays, our civic holidays, made them empty excuses for 3-day vacations, pull out the barbecue, maybe go on a little trip, sales, right? Appliances, carpet sales, whatever. Anything other than really a solemn day of devotion for the blessings of liberty. So I was explaining this to my then 10-year-old daughter, and she got very upset. We were at a lunch together. It was just her and I. I'm going to move the camera a little bit. She pounded on the table and said, "Dad, that's wrong. We need a new celebration for America." And I went, "Whoa, okay." Pandora's box has been opened. And I said, "Okay, Leah." So Leah's my daughter. And I said, "All right, let's do something." So we just looked at some models, and we realized I'd been reading an article about Kwanzaa. And some people think that it's an old African holiday brought over on the slave ships. It's not. It was invented in the 60s by the professor that started the Black Studies movement. And he basically started in his basement. And he took the menorah model, although there's some controversy about whether he took the menorah, but I think it was. And every day you light a candle. Every day that you light a candle, you celebrate a different principle. And there's like community and faith and things like that. And he took terms from Swahili to talk about those principles. And a lot of people celebrate. And I said, Leah, that Kwanzaa model, what do you think? She says, "Oh, Dad, that's great. Let's do that. Let's have a week." And then we looked on the calendar, kind of looking for different anchor dates that could solidify that. We realized that 9/11 through 9/17 is a 7-day period. The 11th, of course, is the anniversary of the terrorist attacks. The 17th is the anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. So these great anchor dates, we fill it in by celebrating our founding first principles from our Declaration of Independence, which are unalienable rights, limited government, the social compact, equality, the right to alter, abolish, and oppressive government, and key documents and speeches that embody that, founding fathers and other great patriots that made them come alive in America, and flags from history. First, my daughter said, "Dad, we need to get the kids excited. Let's have fireworks." I said, "Leah, you're right. We need to get the kids excited, but fireworks, it's you got to go outside. It's expensive. It's kind of taken." She goes, "Oh yeah, Dad, let's have flags." And kids love flags. And she's right. We have all these really cool flags from our history that we don't have a reason to learn about or to delve into or to celebrate, except for Patriot Week. Interestingly, we just had the Colin Kaepernick thing, right? That's one of the flags. The Betsy Ross flag is one of the flags that we celebrate. We have the Gadsden flag and a variety of other flags. And each one has their own story, which shows why it's important, why it relates to what we're trying to do. So I've been working on that. This is our 10th anniversary. So we have had resolutions in about 17 different states that officially recognized it. We have lesson plans. We have a cable show. We have had parades and festivals and panel discussions. We presided over a gubernatorial debate in Michigan. A lot of different, we have a National Library Initiative, a lot of different activities and ways to get involved, totally grassroots. It is completely nonpartisan. Back when Patriot Week started, the word patriot really wasn't associated with a political movement. I think some people unfortunately use that connotation, but that's not what we are. Our advisory board has very, for lack of a better term, very liberal or left-wing elected politicians, Democrats, and very, very conservative, right-wing, whatever you want to call them, Republicans and a bunch of people in the middle, community, business leaders, and religious leaders, and a bunch of other people. So that takes up a great deal of my time. It's a real passion. I also am working right now temporarily, because eventually it will end. Oakland County, I like getting elevated to a country, but we are just a county, is celebrating its bicentennial next year, and I'm the chairman of our bicentennial effort. So that's been taking a great deal of time and effort. And I spend a fair amount of time still with the Cornerstone Schools. Just stepped down as a board member, but working on another project for them. And I also am going to be starting to teach constitutional law this fall at Western Michigan University. I've taught it before, and they're bringing me back at the law school to teach constitutional law. So that would be, so I'm a little busy, a few things on the plate.
You mentioned how you decided to go to law school because of a desire to make an impact in public service. And you talked a little bit about why, but can you really drill down into why that's important to you and why you had that fire from such a young age, really?
Well, absolutely. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to establish new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organize powers in such form as to them so seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Those words from the Declaration of Independence were revolutionary in 1776. They remain revolutionary today. And one thing I realized is, as I studied in school, was that most people take our liberties and freedoms for granted. And but history shows that we are very unique in the course of human history. We really, if you look at the span of mankind and our civilizations, it's just been the last couple of hundred years where there's been a country that has been focused and founded on the belief that we have unalienable rights that are given by nature, nature's God, that the government serves the people, that the government should be limited, that we should abide by the rule of law as opposed to the kind of the whims and dictates of whoever is in charge at the time, and that we're all equal under the eyes of our creator, but also under the eyes of the law. And it really struck me, especially started in junior high is when I kind of become cognizant of this, and throughout high school, that most people were ignorant of history, didn't really appreciate what we had, the blessings of liberty that we have. And back then, I'm going to show my age, we were in an existential fight against the Soviet Union. That was in the middle of the Cold War, in the late 70s and in the 80s, when I was really becoming politically conscious. And I said, there's this terrible, evil country that wants to obliterate us. And in our own country, we have people that are defending them, apologists saying, their way of life is okay for them. And, they're not that bad. And it really struck me to the core that I didn't think those people were ill-meaning. I just thought they were miseducated and didn't understand the real threat that it posed. And I think, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, all the documents that we have received and everything else, it was worse, I think, than we really thought. And so I've always had this, I should say always, but it developed that I had this burning desire to really save, for lack of a better term, save the country, make sure that the country stays true to its Constitution and our founding first principles from the Declaration of Independence. And as I thought about how best to effectuate that, to contribute, I assumed, maybe I'm wrong, but I assumed that elective office and being a public servant would be the most viable way to do that. So if you look at, and I think I do that every day in the courtroom, but then I have all these, this is why I have all these extracurricular activities, because that's really my burning passion.
Do you feel like with the rights that we, and I'm an American too, very, very proud to be one, the rights that we have allow us to make the changes that we want to make? Like, do you believe that given our framework that we can operate within, that we have like ample opportunity or ample ability to be able to make the changes that we need to make? Or do you think we're restricted to a limited amount of change that we can create?
It's a great question. I believe that we have the ability to fundamentally transform the country in the way that we would like to. And it's a matter of willpower and organization and persistence and dedication. So for example, there's an exercise I do with when I go to, I give speeches quite a bit. I'll walk into the room, I'll recite the words of the Declaration of Independence like I did just a few minutes ago. And I'll say, these are the unalienable rights, limited government, the social compact, equality, the rule of law, and the right to alter or abolish an oppressive government. Those are the founding first principles that our nation was built on, the Declaration. And we've now put those into our Constitution. But we all know that at the time that we declared those founding first principles in the Declaration and created the Constitution, that most people were not part of that great self-government that had been established. Now, it was the freest the world had ever seen at the time, but it was clearly not free for the majority of the people. So I walk in and say, okay, everybody raise your hands, and if you're not a man, put your hand down. So usually about half the people put their hand down. So, okay. And if you're not at least 21, put your hand down. A few more people think, okay. If you are not white, put your hand down. If you're not a practicing Protestant, put your hand down. If you don't own property, put your hand down. And sometimes there's nobody with their hands up. Sometimes there's a few. And so that's where we started. But the founding fathers were not dumb. They were brilliant, and they understood the hypocrisy in a sense of what they had adopted. And Jefferson's words, adopted by the Continental Congress, spoke to everyone. And so immediately, right out of the box, people that were opposed to slavery said, how can we have slavery in the land of the free? People that were discriminated against because of their race said, wait a minute, you said equality for all. How you can't discriminate against me if you believe in equality for all. People that were the wrong religion, people that didn't have property, people, the women. And so they leveraged those words to make a fundamental transformation of American society by staying true to the first principles and making reality live up to that promise. Martin Luther King Jr. said it better than anyone. There was a promissory note that had been given that needed to be collected on. We have a social compact in which the people have united together through the Constitution to allow for additional changes in the Constitution. We have an amendment process. We also have a Constitutional Convention process. And so we have slowly and often at great cost, and most of the people that bore the great cost are not remembered today, altered our society to live up much more fully, not completely, but much more fully to the promises of the founding first principles. So overall, I'm a total optimist. I believe that Americans with the right incentives, with the right education, with the right grit and determination can do anything. I will say that right now I am very pessimistic because most people aren't educated, and the political environment is toxic. The culture is toxic and couldn't care less about what we're talking about today. And so it is very frustrating, and which I think makes the work even more important. And I'll give you an example. In the election of 1800, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had a brutal, brutal campaign, made Trump versus Clinton look like, a field day. It was brutal. Their names are drawn in the mud. And these were two revolutionaries who started the country. They worked together to draft the Declaration of Independence. They were on the committee together, and then they became bitter enemies, and all this stuff happened. Jefferson wins. He gives his first inaugural, and he says, a difference in opinion is not a difference in principle. We were all Federalists. We were all Republicans. And he could say that because in the end, Adams and Jefferson were much closer in their worldview. They agreed on 99.99% of the stuff. They didn't believe in nobility. They didn't believe in a hereditary class. They didn't believe in a monarchy. So their fight was really, in this little, but it got very personal. But they could say we are united in our fundamental beliefs in the country. But if you don't understand the principle, then all you have is the difference in opinion, and it's really easy to go super toxic, saying that person is an idiot or is dumb or doesn't deserve to be heard or needs to be shut up or needs to be oppressed or whatever it is. And I think that's where our country has gravitated toward. And so my sense of overall optimism is hedged by my sense of pessimism about where things stand today. Because I actually think, you can pick a lot of different issues. Many of them have areas that I think the general public could say, okay, this is what we agree on. It might not be what I agree on. It might not be what you agree on. But the general public has kind of a sense for where they would like to go on some things. And it can't get done because the way the partisan politics has devolved into the politics of personal destruction and a winner takes all and no compromise is allowed has really undermined our ability to make additional reforms that we might need to make. So my hope with Patriot Week and the other things that I'm working on is to remind people that we're all Americans, that we really all should believe in these founding first principles, understand our history, and then hopefully take some of the venom out of the discussion and to be able to have a civilized dialogue to work together. And it's not to say that you're not going to agree with everybody or you're not going to scream and yell, but to do it in a way that in the end, okay, we're all in this together, which I think is not so clear right now with a lot of what's going on.
Well, I also think that there's a very big problem of trying to apply or suggesting simple solutions to very structurally long-term and complex problems. And I believe it was R.L. Mencken that said, for every problem, there is a simple solution, clear, concise, and wrong. And, to me, and my grandfather is actually, he was a judge for 33 years. He was he was a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal judge in the state of Louisiana. And so he's actually the one that shared that quote with me. And we talk a lot about this. So, I think having that open discussion is important, but I also think at some point, like there's discussion and then there's a solution that you can then execute and implement to solve the problem, right? So what do you think some of those solutions have to look like in order to solve, some of the problems that you care about the most?
Well, that's a big question. So I will narrow it down to a couple of things. I want to make an observation and then answer the question directly. So I do think that there's part of me that, because of history and my understanding of it, says we have gotten to the point that we're so bureaucratic and we're so ossified that we're starting to resemble Imperial Rome or the Byzantine Empire. And there's so much bureaucracy and so many rules upon rules upon, and trust me, I got to deal with this every day. It's part of my job. And every day there's a new rule, or maybe not every day, but often there's new rules. And you're like, what was so wrong with what we did yesterday that makes us have to do this rule today? I don't think that ever, I shouldn't say ever, but I don't think that it is a high enough concern in the policymaker viewpoint. So I'm not saying blow the system up and start from scratch, but I do think that we should be much more critical about, and I think it does tie into this quote that you mentioned from your grandfather's quoting of Mencken. These are complicated things. And often what you find out is they've implemented the rule, they haven't thought it through, and now there's 5 other collateral consequences, unintended consequences they didn't think about. And now we got to make rules that we deal with the other 5. And then each of those has 5 more. And so this is what happens. You get this huge explosion of rulemaking with very little improvement in whatever they're trying to do. For the things that I care about a tremendous amount, but as a judge, I'm really limited to what I can comment on. So I'll comment on one area that I was caught up in for several years, and it just finished, was social studies standards. Okay, so Michigan, many years ago, did not have social studies standards. I was on, I'd been a member of the State Board of Education, then I had stepped down to become the judge, to take the judgeship, and then they asked me to come back and help with thinking about our problems with social studies. We recommended that we have grade level standards. After intense and strong debate, we eventually came, and this is a several-year process, to an agreed set of standards that were approved by the State Board of Education. First couple drafts were terrible. I pretty much stopped them. The third draft was approved with my blessing, and they made a bunch of changes to make them better, in part because of my criticism. And so then they decided, well, it's been a few years, so let's update them. And so they tried for a couple of years, and they came up with another terrible draft. And I was brought back in to try to help. We improved them significantly, and then it went off the rails because of some misreporting, incompetence in the Department of Education. There's a variety of different things that happen, like putting the wrong drafts out, and it was very confusing. And so the board, after 5 years, eventually adopted standards that were, I think, were fundamentally defective. And so one of the things that I think is absolutely essential to improving everything is that we have a solid set of education standards, and that everyone has the opportunity to receive an excellent education. If there's anything that's the great equalizer that can improve students' lives, families' lives, it's having a great school to be able to go to. And as I said before, my dad was poor. I was, middle class at the best before I became a lawyer. And obviously it's made a tremendous difference to me. And there are a lot of other people out there that don't have anywhere near the opportunity I did, that are trapped in failing schools, that don't have the same, don't have educational opportunities to get out. And that's, to me, it's the civil rights issue of our age. With regard to, standards, what we really need are just historically accurate, non-biased, nonpartisan approach, anchored in history and civics. It doesn't sound like that's hard, but it's super hard in Michigan. And I think in other states too have also struggled. Other states have done a much better job at it, to be honest. So I think that's a starting point. And I'm going to say something slightly controversial. It's absolutely true, though. Public education was started really for three reasons. It was started because the Protestants were concerned about the Catholics not being integrated into society. So they didn't like those parochial school things. So let's set up public schools. So they called them common schools. They wanted to make sure that students could read, so they could read scripture and be saved. And they wanted to make sure that our students learned American history and civics, so that they would be good citizens, grounded in their history. And, suffice it to say that you can't, no one's reading the Bible. Almost no one's reading the Bible anymore in schools. And civics and history are relegated to the back burner as simply unimportant topics and subjects. And so there are a lot of really hardworking teachers that love this stuff that just don't have the opportunity to make it stick because of how the system is set up. So I would fundamentally transform how we teach American history and civics would be the first thing I would do if I had the magic wand. For example, we tend to teach history chronologically. And you say, well, that makes sense, right? So you teach the colonial era, and then you teach the Revolution and the Constitutional Convention, pre-Civil War, the Civil War period, post-Civil War, modern era. But what we do is we straddle it over 13 years, right? K through 12. So people are getting their colonial Revolution stuff, Constitution, mostly in elementary school. They're getting the pre-Civil War, Civil War in middle school. And then they're receiving their modern history in high school, and they usually don't even get past Reagan. And so, there's some exceptions and there's some bright points, but the bottom line is most of the kids the last time they really learned about George Washington and James Madison, the Constitutional Convention, and the Bill of Rights, and how our Constitution was formed, and what it's meant to do, and our Declaration of Independence. That's all back from fifth grade, at fifth grade level. So, there was a recent study that was put out that less than 1/3 of the people can name the three branches of government. There's only three, right? There's the legislative, an executive, and the judicial. It's a foundational part of our Constitution, and only 1/3 of the people know it. That statistic has gotten worse since the last 20 years, because when I started looking into this, it was about half of the people. It's like a little more than half could do that. Now it's 1/3. That is the wrong direction. And so what we need to do is reconfigure how we teach so it's interesting. Because right now, to be honest, a lot of people don't teach it well in an interesting way. Most of the elementary school teachers are not trained in social studies, so they don't know what to do with it. So they usually do it near they give it short shrift. And, teaching it over the course of K through 13, the way that we do, ensures failure. It'd be like if you learned French, but you learn the nouns as an elementary student, you learn the verbs in middle school, and you learned everything else in high school. How many nouns are you going to remember? So it's a serious problem. And so I would restructure that. And if we could get that right, at least we'd have a foundation to not hate each other, and to be able to have a civilized discussion, and to be able to have informed electorate, and probably not be in the pickle that we're in today.
So I guess my question is, in order to actually reform that, we have to go through the process of discussion and then implementation and execution of that in order to make the change, in order to then have better discussion. You know what I mean? Like it
is circular.
It's a very cyclical problem. So how do you stop that? Like, how do you come in the middle of the cycle to disrupt that and actually make meaningful progress?
Right. So, we're probably at the stage now where there's enough people that still care about the country and the Constitution and history and civics and know it, that if they get activated enough, they can make a difference. The old saying is that one person has never changed the world, but the reality is that it's the only thing that's ever changed the world, or an irate minority. If you look at all of the progress that we've made, it's because the people took positions that were basically ludicrous at the time they were suggested. When somebody said, let's abolish slavery back in 1776, people thought, yeah, we don't like slavery and yeah, it's going to die off eventually. But there was such a small minority of people that actually wanted to abolish it right then and there. When people said, let's give the women the right to vote, same thing. I mean, for thousands of years, women had no political. So I'm not too concerned about the numbers, so to speak, as long as the truth is there. And the challenge is getting enough people that are willing to march forward with the truth. And it can be a struggle, and it will be. But I'm not to the point where I think that it's insurmountable. And so groups like Patriot Week, we have a 501c3 nonprofit, my book, America's Survival Guide, at americasurvivalguide.com. But there's a bunch of other organizations. Nobody approaches it like Patriot Week does, because we're trying to renew the spirit of America through a new civic holidays, basically. But we won't get the day off because that kills it, right? It makes it an empty excuse for a week-long vacation. So we don't want that. But there are other organizations that are deeply committed to civics and history. Unfortunately, they're kind of sloshing around right now. And what they need, what would be best is if they could unify. And there's been some moves towards that, at least in the education world, but I don't know. It really hasn't happened beyond that. It still is just kind of its infancy stage in the education world. But I do think it's doable. And it's going to take, I can't clone myself. So hopefully there's some other people out there that are willing to link arms with me and fight for this so that we can get to where we need to be.
I love that you mentioned the truth being one of the fundamentally most important things. I'm a Jewish person, and so I find that there's a lot of misinformation about the truth, especially regarding my people. And so I want to ask about that, right? Specifically, I think there's a huge problem that has been massively blown out of proportion by social media, where there will be a headline put out by a media outlet or a news outlet or something that is inherently inflammatory, right? It is a controversial, inflammatory statement or headline that's brought about because the internet and social media are crushing a lot of media outlets. So they have to put out more controversial things in order to get more attention to stay alive. Right. So that's just a weird but vicious cycle that's been going on. But as a result, now people can share something. And if it's controversial and inflammatory enough, there will be enough shares to where even if that headline represents an article that is totally based on just not fact at all, like no facts at all.
Right.
Because there are enough people sharing it, it is now taken as fact. So as a result of that, a lot of people are now basing their ideology and their thoughts, and they're getting really defensive about and stand up for things that just aren't true. And so then it becomes an issue of, well, that's just your opinion and this is my opinion, but one of those is based on fact and one isn't, right? I think it's a huge problem going on today that I see that's very frustrating. And it even happens with my friends, and I'm sure it happens with me sometimes. So I'm not saying that I'm not to blame. But how do you solve that? How do you come in and how do you bring the truth to light?
Well, I want to make a general comment, and then I'll try to answer the question. So Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident. So self-evident means that you don't have to bother proving the proposition because it's so obviously true. That idea has come under heavy criticism and critique by, for lack of a better term, the ivory tower, the academics, the nihilists, who believe that there is no truth. I guess the only truth is there's no truth, right? And are unwilling to even some basic things like, we don't really talk to each other. We don't understand each other. Well, and they're telling you that, and like, well, I understand what you just said. I may not agree with it, but I just understand. Doesn't that disprove your point? And they go, no, it doesn't. And the fallacies out there that are presented by that academic orientation, I think, is very subversive and destructive to the survivability of our republic. Because if you don't believe in self-evident truths, then kind of getting back to the John Adams, Thomas Jefferson thing, if you don't believe in principles, you don't believe in self-evident truths, then it's just whatever you believe. And then you have alternative facts and you have all this other stuff. And it is entirely, as I said, subversive, and pulls from underneath us the foundation of which we stand. And that goes, it can go to anarchy, it can go to communism, it can go to fascism, who knows where it would go. Probably America would go to the right, to more towards fascism than communism, but who knows. And so that idea that there isn't truth really needs to be fought against. And those that, unfortunately, I don't want to speak out of turn, so I want to be careful about this. I will just say that some people really seem to believe in truth when it fits when it's convenient for them. Mm-hmm. And then when it's not convenient for them, they really don't want to acknowledge truth. And so we really need to really stand up and stand for the proposition that truth matters and it exists. And that is core, and those that should be defending that with all their might and vigor are not. Churches, for example, that they really ought to be on the forefront of this. There is this thing called truth, and we believe in it, and not just say it in or temples. Just don't say it on Saturday or say it on Sunday or say it on Friday, or whatever your Sabbath day is. In your house of worship, you should be saying it across the board all the time. And I think there's been a retreat in our society for those that are willing to stand up and defend even the idea of the truth. And that's tremendously destructive. So the question is, how do you fight that? And the way that you fight that, I think, is everything is personal. Everything comes down to the person. So, to your listeners, your viewers, you're going to have opportunities in your life today, tomorrow, next week, whenever it is, to say the truth when it needs to be said and not be quiet, to not go along for the sake of going along, but saying, no, wait a minute, let's talk about the truth here and not be ashamed of it. And everyone has this temptation to lie, and I'm a Catholic, so I got that Catholic guilt, right? So I'm not suggesting that I'm better than anybody else, but try very hard to tell the truth, or, if, at least don't lie. I don't know if you know who Jordan Peterson is, but that's one of his rules for life. And it's one I think that is ancient and has been around for thousands of years, and we've forgotten. So I really do think that this is not going to change because someone gets elected that, is an inspiring figure like JFK or Reagan or FDR. Then all of a sudden the world, or Abraham Lincoln, all of a sudden the world changes, and it has to happen in the individual heart in mind. And so my message to those that are listening is, you live that way, become a model, and tell other people to become a model too. It's frustrating for me because I'm a judge and I'm very limited in, I can't get involved in partisan politics and things like that. So it's often me biting my lip because I'm not allowed to engage in certain activities. But the rest of you aren't judges, so you have the ability to exercise your free speech a little more vigorously and robustly than I do.
How do you feel, and maybe this is something that you can't talk about, I'm not sure, but what's your opinion on the current state and the development of throughout the history of our country of the separation between church and state?
Well, it's very interesting that you asked me this at this time, because I am writing my lesson plans for my constitutional law class, and I go through because then most law students don't get this. So I'm kind of doing a con law 101 where I explain the origin of the Constitution, and I go back into its philosophical foundations from the Declaration. And then the first set of cases we're going to delve into are the free exercise of religion cases, which is the first clause of the First Amendment is the free exercise of religion. The second clause is the Establishment Clause, which bars any state-established church. And it's always been a tension in our country. And I do think we need to acknowledge that our history has been one of great tumult in the past, and it's not some kind of golden age ever. So we've always had this huge tension in our country about being openly faithful and yet not imposing our religious faith on others. And it's a tough tension, because often if to give you an example, some people would argue that it's unconstitutional for a fire department to pull up to a burning temple, synagogue, or church and put out the fire because you're aiding a religious institution, and government's not supposed to do that. I think it's a ludicrous position, but some people argue that. Other people argue, we ought to be able to have the state mandate in its textbooks, the teaching of Christianity, and they did that for a long time. I personally believe that, in the case law supports, that's unconstitutional. That is unconstitutional. We're not supposed to be evangelizing through the government. And I always like to think about, flip who is getting the benefit or the harm. If it's a Muslim versus a Jew versus a Christian, it should have the same answer. And so if you feel, we ought to support, the church, but oh no, I don't want to support those Muslims, then you got a problem. You're not being consistent. And so I think as kind of a litmus test, I'll get to your question in a second, that's a good way to view it. So I think in one sense, we're in I would say generally we're in a pretty good spot. I don't really think, despite all the problems that we have, that religious freedom, and I'm a really huge proponent of religious freedom, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on probably much more than other professors, explaining the importance of religious liberty and freedom in my class. There really aren't, compared to historical terms and other places and times, we're in a very good spot. I mean, you pretty much can practice your religion the way you want, unless you're hurting somebody else. There aren't people burning down. There are exceptions, but it's not like Syria. It's not like other places overseas where simply being of a certain faith marks you for execution. I mean, from your Jewish heritage, you know all about that. So in that sense, I think that we're in a very good spot. it's hard for me to think that there's much establishment per se of religion. I know I think that there's been a reluctance of some people to express their religious beliefs, and I don't think that's healthy. I think people should be upfront about it. And, I thought the whole Romney episode about how he had a him and haw and, kind of did his JFK speech, which kind of worked and then didn't, he went back and forth. I just thought that was, ridiculous. He's the mainstream church. He has mainstream views. That should be that. But on the other hand, somebody wants to challenge him on those views. I don't have a problem with that either. So I think in that sense, I'm sure you can pick out examples about, people abusing their positions of power but from the 50,000 foot view or even the 500-foot view, we are so blessed to live in this country with the religious freedoms and liberties that we have that in the cases that I'm reviewing, they're all about, if somebody gets playground equipment, that's a church, like, okay, it's a constitutional law case. I understand I have to teach it, but that's nothing compared to what, the interesting warfare that was going on in Europe or what's going on today in the Middle East. And so I think we need to acknowledge in that realm, I think we're in pretty good shape.
So I want to kind of change or shift gears a little bit. You're building your nonprofit, your organization, and it seems to be in a different capacity of being in public service where you are a public official, right? Where you are a judge. I feel like it's just a different type of position that you hold there. What have you found to be some of the challenges and benefits of moving into that role of, being in the nonprofit sector and getting to play in that playground?
Well, I love the nonprofit sector. There's a big problem being a judge is that I am not allowed to personally solicit fundraising. So that has clearly hobbled the ability of the nonprofit to be more vibrant. On the other hand, being a judge gives it a certain amount of credibility and attention that it might not otherwise have. So I'm not sure how that balances out. I love the ability of the nonprofit world to kind of create your own world. So what we want to do with Patriot Week, I'm not fixated about, we did one thing this year or last year, and 2 years ago, so we need to do it again this year. I don't think that's necessary. I think that may ossify us. So the ability to be creative, novel, meet a whole bunch of people like you is great, and people across the country is fabulous. In Oakland County, almost everybody in my courtroom, all the case arose from Oakland County. Chances are, well, first off, all the jury people are from Oakland County. Most of the lawyers are from Oakland. So it's we're a big county. So I'm not complaining in that sense, but the ability to work with people in other states, other parts of Michigan, has been great as well. But I think the ability to kind of create your own world and prioritize and go into arenas that you wouldn't have as a judge, I think is fascinating and a lot of fun.
As you grow your organization and you look to the future of what you want to create and the type of legacy that you want to leave behind through this organization, what does that really look like for you? I mean, what sort of footprint do you want to leave on the world?
Well, the want to and what will happen, of course, are two different things. But we have a business plan. The business plan is that we will be recognized officially in all 50 states and through Congress. We being Patriot Week, not the foundation itself. That we will have chapters in all the different states, that we will have activities and events there, that we will continue to grow our web presence, our social media presence. And the end goal is that I can retire from Patriot Week, and the next year, all across the country, people say, well, it's 9/11 and it's Patriot Week. What are we doing? Or maybe hopefully they're doing that in July or May or whatever, thinking about it. and it's permeated the public consciousness. I've done some research on a fair amount on how other holidays have been engendered, and it's one sense very inspiring, another sense kind of depressing. You know, Mother's Day took a lot of decades for it to really sink in, and many of these other, that's what you learn about history. It took the suffragettes 80 years to get the 19th Amendment through. So I know that this is not, even in today's world where things can go viral, those things that go viral, they disappear and people forget about them, you know, in a couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years. We want to have the kind of, with a staying power that people will say, it's Patriot Week. This is when we remember our founding first principles for our Declaration of Independence. We celebrate our founding fathers and other great patriots, certain key documents and speeches and flags from our history, and what are we going to do today or this week? And if we can do that, we will have changed the world.
I want to ask about connection. And the reason I want to ask is because I am fascinated by people. I mean, I just love to understand people, and I'm infinitely curious. And I feel like in order to have been able to accomplish all the incredible things that you have been able to accomplish, it's probably, you know, my best guess would be that you've had to work a lot with other people. And that's, you know, the way that you got it done. And you continue to get things done. So I'm curious to learn, what is your philosophy on developing deep, meaningful, and genuine connections with other people?
What is the philosophy?
What is your philosophy?
I think the first thing you have to understand is that you are, as a human being, are fallible and don't know everything. And in fact, you don't know what you don't know. And you need to be open-minded. You need to be, cannot be sensitive to criticism. And that you need to understand you're not going to get anything done unless you cooperate with other people. And I have seen some really awesome ideas and leaders who have lost their way and have become arrogant or insular and have become their own worst enemy. And I think you really need to be careful about that. So you need to have a real sense of humility. Now, there's some core things you're not going to change. Patriot Week, we're not going to change what we stand for. We're not going to change our mission, but how we go about it, who we go about it with, the sequence, the timing, should we, spend more time on blogs and on videos and less time on in-person, should we go Facebook Live? I mean, you got 18 platforms. You could teach me a lot. I think you really just have to understand to be cooperative. The other thing I'd say is, and I am by no sense of imagination perfect at this, try to set some goals, try to empower other people to get the goals. Remember that they're busy, so they might need a little bit of prodding and nagging to get to the goals, but don't do it in a way where they just hate you and don't want to work with you anymore. You got to do it in a way that's encouraging and constructive versus discouraging and destructive. So that's been, I'm very blessed to have had great board members on Patriot Week we didn't have the nonprofit for the first year, but people that were helping with Patriot Week or on the nonprofit board for the full 10 years. And people come in and out, and I understand, they're not indentured servants or slaves, and they get to leave. But respect what they do, respect their opinion, be open-minded. And I'll tell you, there have been a lot of, and I'm comparing this to other boards I've been on. There have been a lot of decisions where I've wanted to go one way, and the board says, I don't think so, Michael. Think about this, think about that. And I'm like, okay, you know, where other boards, the leader's like, no, we're going to do it my way or no way. And I just think that is a real way to shut people down, to destroy creativity, and to lose fabulous talent. So even if in the end, I still thought we should have gone that way, for the purpose of moving the organization forward and respecting the views of others, that's why they're on the board. If I didn't think they were worthy of helping with the board, I wouldn't have had them on the board. So it's a complicated situation, but honey works much better than vinegar. Cooperation works much better than adversity. Truth works much better than hiding, and lack of transparency. That's another issue I've seen in some boards. So be upfront, explain the situation, even if it's terrible. They're going to help you if you're upfront. If you hit it and you didn't say anything for 3 years, whatever that might be, you're not going to get the support that you need.
So I want to thank you very much, Judge, for coming on the show today, and sharing some of your time with me. I'm very appreciative of that. I do have 2 more quick questions for you, then we'll wrap it on up. First is, what truths do you hold today that you think might change in the next 10 years?
Well, I have no idea. And I'll tell you, I mean, I was very forthright. You asked me about my history, and I told you about my journey in faith. Now, if you had asked 10-year-old Michael, would you be a, that 51-year-old Catholic guy? No freaking way. You asked the 18-year-old. So I don't know. I will say this. I love to learn. I'm best I can read many different perspectives. And I think when you stop learning and you stop open-minded, you basically die. And so you can ask me 10 years from now what I changed, but it's very hard to know. Yeah.
So last question for you. And for context for the question, I'm 24, and this is a very, very personal question. But what question should I be asking you, specifically you, that I just wouldn't think to ask?
That is a good one. So the question would be, I'm going to go back to the judgeship for a minute. Is there anything that has made you change your thoughts on how you judge and how you judge? Because I've been a judge for 16 and a half years. I want to echo my earlier point. If I didn't change as a judge, I was very young when I was appointed. I was in my mid-30s. So I'm only 51 now. If I never reassessed what I was doing and how I was approaching the judgeship in certain cases, then what the hell is all the experience for? I can just, hire somebody off the street and have them do it. And the example I will give you is the intractable example of opiate and other substance abuse. And I'm schizophrenic on this, or split personality disorder, I think is the better term for it. Part of me says is the libertarian. They don't hurt any other people. They could do what they want with their body. If they hurt somebody else while they're on drugs, then you should punish them, but let them go. Okay. Another perspective is, and this is the perspective which I've learned more about as a judge, is addiction doesn't affect just the person. It affects the family and the community, rips families apart. It throws them into chaos, and it almost always has, doesn't always have to, but almost always has collateral effects where people are stealing or they're lying or they're cheating people or the driving drunk or whatever it is. And so you can stop the substance abuse, then you can help the society. And then even more recently, and this is like last 6 months recently, I've been questioning whether or not I can do more as not just in how, I guess, in how I sentence in connection with these folks. I've been very supportive of like drug courts. I was an urban drug court judge, and I've sent many people, you can transfer them over to drug court. And I've done that with a lot of people, and I've sent them to residential drug treatment and all kinds of different programs. But is there something more that nobody else is doing? And I'm working, it's a slow process, but I've been changing how, when you tell a prisoner something, it's usually called allocution. So I've been changing how I allocute to those that I sentence to try to, I'm not one of these self-esteem people, but I believe that everyone has purpose and meaning, that there's a divine spark in their life, that they can have a tremendous purpose. And if they take courage and truth and put it together, that anybody can be redeemed at any time. And I'm being more purposeful about expressing that. And then I'm hopefully going to develop a pilot program that will try to implement some of that in a much more vigorous way after they're sentenced. Because sentencing is usually just, a few sentences, and then you got to go on to the next case. So I don't know that Michael 10 years ago, 5 years ago, would have been nearly as open-minded about that as I am. So that's the question you should have asked.
Well, thank you very much, Judge, for your time. It's been an honor to be able to spend some time with you, and I'm very grateful that you would choose to do that. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to everybody who's watching and listening, I want to thank y'all very, very much, because your time is very valuable. And I'm also grateful that y'all would choose to share some of it with us today. So thank y'all. I love y'all very, very much.
I forgot to say one thing real quick.
Sure.
If you're interested in Patriot Week, you can go to patriotweek.org. It's patriotweek.org, or the book is americasurvivalguide.com. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off in your close.
All good. All good. So thanks again, everybody. Hope to see y'all on the next episode.